I got the 10 to 18 millimeters EF-S lens for my Canon EOS M50. So in the past I did have the Canon EOS M50, but I didn't have a wide-angle lens. This here is my camera bag, and in this camera bag you find the STM EF-S 18 to 30 to 135, which is kind of a fine lens, and it's basically the kind of best zoom lens you can get for EF-S that is still completely silent when shooting video. There is also an older one available, 18 to 200, which is better because it has more zoom, kind of. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better in terms of the quality that it captures, but it means that you can zoom in more, and this I found to be more practical. Nonetheless, this older one, which is a USM lens, does come with a noise that is whenever focusing. So if you then want to record video, then the microphone that is attached on the camera to the camera, or the internal microphone from the camera, picks up this noise and the audio is pretty much unusable. This was a major issue I just couldn't find a solution to when actually trying to record video back in 2016 and 17, and my phone just was not good enough to record video, and I also couldn't record video on my camera because of these noises. The solution then finally were STM lenses. I discovered that STM lenses were basically the better options, and these mean just that the motor is a different kind and it is silent. The 18 to 135 is also image stabilized, and it's also EF-S, just like this one. Now on the camera here you already see that there is something additionally attached, and so now we have this 10 to 18 millimeter lens, which solves the problem of this only going to 18 millimeters. Why is this so crucial? 18 millimeters would be kind of wide lens already, so it would be kind of a wide field of view already. The problem is just that these numbers are made not for APS-C cameras, which have a slightly smaller sensor, but they are made for full-frame cameras. So even though this is an EF-S lens and it is not a full-frame lens basically, it still has the numbers from the full frame format on it. So now this sensor here, an APS-C sensor, is 1.6 times smaller than a full frame sensor. What this means is that if a certain lens, a full frame lens, projects a certain image, a certain basically area onto basically my hand, let's just say here, then this projected area is a little bit bigger than the sensor captures, which means the sensor captures only a smaller portion of what the lens actually would project onto the sensor, which means it crops out, it zooms in. And this factor is 1.6. So you multiply the 18 millimeters of this here by 1.6 and it gives you 28.8 millimeters, or not millimeters, but I think it actually is millimeters, but I don't know what it stands for exactly. According to a quick Google search, the eye equivalent focal length, this is what the millimeters are, the focal length is approximately 22 millimeters. So this means the 28 millimeters we then achieve with a 18 to 135 lens on the 18 millimeters would then be equivalent to a slight zoom in compared to the normal eye. But if you then are recording on a desk, for example, and you want to record yourself, then this is just a little bit too cropped in. Now we meet an additional problem, and this additional problem is that this is an EF-S lens meant for basically EF-S cameras. So the EF-S now is the mount. The mount is basically the ring that is attached to the camera and that the lenses then mount onto. Now this ring is slightly different compared to a Canon EOS 70D, 80D and so on and so forth, which do have EF-S mounts. Because this is an M mount, EOS M50 is the camera name. So for this reason I got a Viltrox adapter. Viltrox is, I think, a Chinese company, and this here is then the EF-S, so basically where the EF-S lenses attach, and this is where the EF lenses attach. So there is EF now also different. EF lenses are full frame lenses for normal Canon cameras which come with a full frame. So what this means now is that I can attach to a Canon EOS M mount, the ring, I can attach with this adapter EF-S lenses that would normally be used on EF-S cameras, which can either be EF-S lenses, so APS-C lenses in this regard, or they can be EF lenses, which would then be full frame lenses. Now, they both project a little bit differently then, at least I think so. Now, because I also do have one EF lens, which is not EF-S, so it is not meant for APS-C or a crop format camera, I do have a different adapter. This different adapter is also from Viltrox, and this is called the mount adapter EF EOS M2, so this mounts to only EF lenses. I'm not entirely sure why I cannot just mount this to this here, but I think I can. It is just that then there is the focal length a little bit differently. I think the reason I have two, and I got them already quite a while ago, is because I first bought this one. And this is a 1.71 adapter, which means it projects the image slightly different. So the 0.71 now stands again for the crop factor, but in this regard, it's basically a crop factor that is smaller than 1. So this means it doesn't crop in, but it crops out. So instead of being a magnifying glass, it basically focuses the thing a little bit more. So this means now we have basically a bigger field of view, as I understand it, and I think it's correct. If the EF lens would normally project onto a, let's say, rectangle that is full frame and a little bit bigger than this here, then the 0.71 should allow more of what the lens captures to be captured by the smaller sensor, because it's basically brought down to the smaller sensor size. This also means it should have a little bit more of a full frame look, so the blurred background should be a little bit better. I didn't compare them yet, but now I did do a short comparison shot, so I changed the adapter in between, and this is before, this is after. So the one that is zoomed in more is with the normal adapter, and this here is the speed booster. With the speed booster, you can also see potentially that the background is a little bit more blurry, but since the other one is cropped in more, the effect might be countered out. So the background might look the same even though the one is more cropped in, and with more cropped in images, there is usually a bigger distance in terms of the blurriness from the fore and the background. An additional problem I encountered now many times is that the speed booster also captures more light. What this now means for everyday shooting is that you cannot really use this 50mm EF-S lens, it's not an EF-S but an EF lens, in kind of everyday life. And I did notice the fans just went on my notebook a while ago. And as it captures more light, because it is a speed booster, the problem is that you would need, it's basically too much light for the camera itself. And if it's too much light for the camera itself, the camera has trouble regulating all the light. And if you then still don't want to close your aperture, basically how wide the aperture is basically comparable to the iris. So the iris opens up if there is less light and closes down if there is too much light. Now, because I don't have an ND filter, which is a filter that makes the whole image just a little bit darker, a filter that is applied similarly to a normal UV filter, which you find on here, which is not necessarily that useful in terms of filtering out UV, but it acts as a very cheap protection of the lens itself if you plan to maybe resell it or just to not scratch it. So overall, the speed booster is probably something I didn't really need in everyday life, because the effect is very limited, as you saw. It is a little bit wider, but I mean, zoomed in is also sometimes nice, and also if you have a zoom lens, then you can just zoom in on the zoom lens. Of course, it is sometimes useful because on portraits you don't want to be that much away, and especially considering that the 50mm on here are without a speed booster normally than on an APS-C camera, not again 50mm, but 50mm multiplied by 1.6, which should result in an 80mm lens then. Let's check this. Yes, I calculated and remembered correctly. But with all this, I still didn't have a wide-angle lens. And so now I finally bought one. This was about 180 euros. This is refurbished, and you also shouldn't keep them open that long, but I don't have that many lens caps also for the backs. So for this reason I have, or actually I might have multiple lens caps. I just didn't put them on yet. So this is here one of the other ones. And because the mount on the back is at least similar, you can use them interchangeably. But as they do have different diameters, and the diameter of the 18 to 135 is here 67 millimeters, and this here, the wide angle lens is also 67 millimeters. Apparently it is also usable for macro shoots, which you cannot see very well as of now, but now you do. And the minimum focus distance is apparently 22 centimeters or 0.22 meters. So we can actually try this out, and I will then show you the picture. What also has to be said in this particular setup, I did choose the EF-S lenses and the EF lenses, so basically the EF mount, because I figured in the future I might get a full frame camera, and overall, because many more people compared to the EOS M mount use EF-S lenses and have used in the past, these lenses are also a little bit better available. I wanted to stop in between, but I didn't. This means now I got this here refurbished, I got this here refurbished. This one cost, I think, 150, this 180, or maybe this was a little bit more. And this I got new because there weren't any good refurbished ones. And the difference was like 5 euros, 80 euros, I think this one cost, which is fairly cheap. And it is also a very nice portrait lens, which is the main one I've used for many portraits I shot, or the previous version of this, which was also a 50mm lens, but again on a APS-C camera it is a 80mm lens. So now let's take again this off, and the additional thing I wanted to add is that obviously if you now have an adapter on your camera all the time, this adds an additional bulk of about 2 to 3 centimeters. And since the point of a small camera is that it is small, this kind of defies the point of having a very small camera a little bit. Part of the reason I got the EOS M50 compared to the EOS 80D after my 70D broke after a few years was because I wanted to have a smaller camera. But then if I need an adapter all the time because of this lens setup with the speed boost and also with this normal adapter, then again, this is not the best. This lens feels a little bit cheap. It also feels kind of light, but well, at the same time, it is the one I had to get because it's basically the only one from Canon that offers this lens of this range of focal length with 10 to 18 millimeters. What I wanted to test, and also what I kind of needed, was just an ability to also have this focal length covered. Whether this is me doing video or this is me, I don't know, taking pictures inside houses, I just found that the 18 millimeters or the 28 resulting millimeters are just a little bit too zoomed in. And so you can never really picture a house or something like this. And this now, with all these 3 lenses, I think I have covered basically all the different scenarios I want to shoot. I mean, ideally, I would just have one lens that would be very nice, that would have maybe 10 millimeters to 200 millimeters and be as big as this one, plus the adapter maybe, and then I would have everything covered. But the problem is that as you have a wider range of possible focal lengths, this also means that the picture quality suffers because there have to be more rotating parts and more different lenses in there, which you then rotate against each other, and then you change the proportions, which then changes basically where the light hits the sensor. And this then in return means that you can zoom in and out. But the more moving parts and the more lenses, the more there are things like chromatic aberrations, and which are basically the blue and red things you can see, or artifacts you sometimes can see on edges where there is something that is very bright and then there is something that is very dark. So you also have these fixed focal lengths. This, for example, the 50 millimeter. But now let's try out this lens a little bit. So I zoom in here and I go very close. So this is not 22 centimeters. a kind of thing you can do with a normal zoom lens is that even though, for example, this zoom lens says 39 centimeters is the minimum focal distance, if you zoom in, this seems to be kind of bypassed. I don't know by which mechanism this exactly works, but it probably means that if it is zoomed out, then it's 39 centimeters, the distance where you can then focus on. But if you then zoom in, this seems to be bypassed a little bit, probably by the fact that it just zooms into the actual, at least not digitally, but analogly, or whatever the right word here is, analogly. So what also has to be mentioned here is that the light in my studio, even though it seems bright, it is actually not that bright, and the camera seems to have quite a little bit of trouble. And this older EOS M50 seems to have a little bit of a problem with low light performance. Is this the best quality, super high quality lens? Probably not, but it is the thing Canon offers, and therefore it works fairly fine, I would say. It is also 5 to 5.6 in terms of these numbers that are on the lenses, which I can't remember what they are for. It is also IS image stabilized and also has this STM motor. So STM stands for stepper motor. In June 2012, Canon introduced a new lens motor designed to address the issue of lens noise when shooting movies with an EOS DSLR camera. Called a stepper motor, it converts digital pulses into mechanical rotation. Now, in terms of how I use this, I thought about having this as a setup camera that I would be able to access also from my notebook and not just recording with my phone, which would be a little bit more beneficial. I can also turn it around and then film vertically. You already kind of see the focal length it would project, and if I would mount this in a distance similar to where I have mounted my phone, then this would probably result in a very similar picture or focal length. So I just took a picture, and now let's see what focal length it resulted in. It's a little bit not that wide as the phone here, as the front camera of the phone, but well, what is also very noticeable is that my phone, the Galaxy S10, a phone that is now out 4 years, is just decently better in terms of the video quality, noticeably better in terms of the video quality compared to this here, what this camera shows me at this lighting situation. Now, as mentioned, one idea was to have it mounted on the screen or above the screen, which is kind of here in my studio. So currently I do have my Zoom mounted up here, which records the audio. Also, when I'm in front of the notebook, a big problem is that my notebook just has the fan running all the time, so I cannot really have my computer running and also record, which is kind of a problem. So a previous idea was, and I also made already a video about this, to mount my camera up here and then to have kind of a wide angle view onto me down when I'm standing directly in front of the notebook. And then I could make videos where I access, for example, information directly in front of the camera. That would be always mounted, and I also could use this as a always mounted webcam. This would result in an image that's about this size, but I could also zoom in a little bit. Of course, the angle might have to be adjusted maybe to here, but I then at least would have something that is always installed and kind of ready to go. In addition, I wanted just to have the possibility to just shoot everything on my camera if I want to shoot everything on my camera, and not to take out my phone to take a wide shot. For example, recently I was in kind of a mountain hike, and I just took out my phone to just capture the wider thing, because I did not have something to capture the wider focal length of the mountains. And this is something I really wanted to also capture on camera and not just being zoomed in all the time. So I think the combination of these three lenses I now have, all of which EF-S lenses or EF lenses, and all of which not very expensive. I could obviously also get more expensive lenses. There would be the L series that was in the past kind of the prime series for the lens, for the Canon lenses, and now it is kind of transitioning into the R mount. So the R mount is the new mount that is just for the cameras that are basically the new series, which are meant to replace the old standard high quality DSLR cameras, which are now mirrorless cameras. The M50 is kind of the entry model into this, but there is also kind of a new version. I think it is called the R50. There is also an R10, and then it goes down. I think there is also an R8 or 7, and then the R3 and the R5 are kind of the replacements for the previous models that are equivalent to this. So there was previously a Canon 5D, and now there is a R5, and so on and so forth. There's also an R3, and these kind of capture the different kind of markets, I guess. I wondered many times whether it would just make more sense to just not try to take at least videos with this camera anymore, because it's just not that good anymore. This phone here is better in terms of taking these videos that I'm currently recording compared to this here. This phone also has better microphones, and this is a issue I have now been addressing recently with purchasing another microphone, which is the Rode Video Mic Go 2, which should be a microphone that then mounts on top, because I just wanted to be able to record something with this here. I wanted to have kind of the ultimate film kit. In the past I said in previous videos, like, I don't know, a few years ago, that this would be the ultimate cinema kit. Obviously it is not, and it is also, this is mostly due to the fact that the sensor, I think, is just not that good, and it's a camera that probably came out almost a decade ago. I don't know if I have the EOS M51 or the 2 version, but I think it's the 1 version because it nowhere says 2. There's also a second version, and now there is also the newer version, which is kind of the R50. I did decide a few years ago, around in 2018, to first not get a camera, and then I bought one of these phones, and I then decided to just shoot everything on the phone because it was just so much easier. This is the thing I have always in my pocket. I can shoot photo and video with these. But because you can only zoom in up to 2 times, even though it has a lens, an additional lens, a zoom lens, a telephoto lens in it, which zooms in about 2 times. So I assume 1.0 is about the equivalent again to the eye length, which would be 22 millimeters. But then there is a different story compared to video. First of all, even in photo, you cannot zoom in up. You can zoom in up to two times, but that's about it. And so what I also noticed is just the practicability of shooting photo on here. If you just can't zoom in and zoom out with one thing, you can just capture something real quick. This was even better in the older DSLR cameras that had a mirror in them, because they didn't project digitally basically what is projected onto the sensor. This here is, again, there is a small LCD screen in here. I think it's LCD, and this shows you then what is basically what the camera sees, what the sensor sees. This also means it shows you directly what the sensor sees, not compared to kind of smaller pocket cameras where I think it's an additional thing that is slightly different from what the sensor of the camera then sees or captures. So one issue is that you just are not fast enough with a phone. Of course, you are comparably faster if you have the phone in your pocket compared to having the camera somewhere in your backpack. But if you have the camera out, then you can just shoot something very quick. So in short, for videography, this might not be the best thing, but it still is probably able to capture something at a decently higher quality, at least if it's not low light. You also have the option to have multiple different lenses. And in terms of photography, I just didn't want to completely give up photography and running around with a camera in cities I explore and just taking pictures for the sake of taking pictures. And of course, there is also just a different look to a camera, which you still cannot really achieve with a phone, because the phone just has a very limited sensor size and also just these 2 or 3 different lenses that are installed kind of into the phone. Of course, it's not only lenses, but it's actually 3 different cameras, which I think have also 3 different sensors then. In addition, you also have the front camera. Here, you only have 1 sensor. To conclude, I still wanted to be able to take pictures, and now I can take pictures in all focal lengths, at least the ones I kind of need. Of course, I don't have a super zoom, but I could get basically the reverse of a speed booster, which would be something that actually again crops in more. And I wanted to be able to have a video kit where I can just say, okay, I'm making a video for a company or something like this, and I am able to shoot with this here and this here and this here, and also then to record